Hi guys. A new Digimon starter deck came out recently, and that means I get to review it. So in this video, I'll be reviewing the Beelzemon Advanced Deck Set, or as normal people call it, the Beelzemon starter deck. This video will be split into two halves. In the first half, I'll review the product as a whole, evaluate the deck using the grading system from my first starter deck video, and talk about the general strengths and weaknesses of the deck. The second half of the video will include a combo tutorial and an in-depth rules lesson about trashing cards. Make sure to stick around for that to ensure you're playing the deck correctly from both a strategy and rules perspective. So what does Advanced Deck Set even mean? It's just a marketing term used to indicate that this deck is intended to be stronger than normal starter decks and costs about twice as much at around $30. So what do you get for your money? In the box is a 54 card deck, all foil by the way, 60 sleeves, 10 alt art reprints, 2 memory gauges, and a paper playmat. I think the accessibility of this product really makes it great. You can walk into a card shop, buy the deck, sleeve it up, and be playing the game within 10 minutes, all without buying anything extra. You won't be winning any tournaments, but the deck is still strong enough to go toe-to-toe with what I'll call fun tier decks. This is much more than can be said of the other starters, which will get steamrolled by anything except another starter deck. So what's the appeal for existing Digimon players? Besides the deck itself, which is easily tournament viable with a few upgrades, the reprints have really nice art, and I can see them being sought after for their swag value, especially X Antibody. Overall, I think this is a great product. Even with the price in mind, I have no trouble calling this the best starter we've ever seen. It's time to grade this bad boy. If you watched my starter deck video, you know it's coming, but if you didn't, here's a quick refresher. I'll be evaluating this deck based on 3 criteria that I think are the most important to consider when buying a starter deck: learning, value, and upgrade potential. Learning is how well the deck teaches the game to new players. Variety of mechanics and simplicity are both important here so that the player learns as much as possible, but doesn't get overwhelmed or confused. Value is a measure of how many cards in the starter deck are still relevant in the fully upgraded version, or in other decks, and also takes into account any bonus cards that come in the box. Upgrade potential is exactly what it sounds like. How good is the deck if it's upgraded to its most optimal form? I had a really hard time deciding on a grade for learning. Here's the thing about this deck. The game plan is simple, but the execution isn't. A decent amount of technical knowledge is required to perform the combos, let alone even know that they're possible in the first place. The deck is very strong, but only if you're taking full advantage of the engine. Otherwise, it's kind of a wet noodle. The mechanical variety is adequate, but I wish there were a few more keywords included. At least they included tamers this time, and there's no vanillas either, though Phascomon comes dangerously close. With that said, I settled on a C grade for learning. It's not impossibly complex, but I wouldn't exactly recommend it to a brand new player without someone to teach them. If that new player is you, keep watching and hopefully I can clear things up. Value is again a little tricky. A ton of cards in the starter deck find their way into the upgraded deck, so many in fact that it's easier to show which ones aren't used. However, almost none of these cards have any crossover with other decks. The reprints don't help much in this regard either. Only X Antibody and starter deck Vmon are commonly seen, with the rest rarely played. I think B is a fair grade here, though I will note that it is propped up a bit by the monetary value of the cards. Upgrade potential is a pretty definitive S. According to Japanese data, Beelzemon is a top 5 deck in both BT12 and BT13. Obviously, JP data doesn't directly translate to the English metagame, but it gives the impression that the deck is very strong, and as such is the obvious choice for competitively minded players. Moving on to the strengths of the deck, the biggest and most obvious one is the free memory gain and removal it gets just by trashing cards. There are 8 memory gain cards and 2 removal cards, meaning you have a very high chance to hit one every time you trash, and a pretty good chance to hit 2 at once. Security is also very strong. 6 removal options plus 2 blast modes actually make it quite scary to attack into. When playing against this deck, make sure to check your opponent's trash for these cards so you can approximate how dangerous their security stack is. The next one is actually something we haven't seen in a starter deck yet, and that's a backup win condition. Don't have enough pieces for a Beelzemon combo? Use Beelstarmon instead and go for a Rookie Rush. And finally, a less obvious strength is that this deck is actually very difficult to plan against. Because you never know exactly how much memory it will have access to, it's hard to gauge exactly how good their turn will be or even how close they are to winning. The random free removal can also throw a wrench in your plans. It's not uncommon to have an advantage at the end of your turn and then suddenly be down a guy and staring down a level 6 at the start of your next turn. The deck probably sounds really strong, right? I mean, it is, but it's not without its faults. The first and most obvious weakness is the propensity for Beelzemon to deck itself out. Every trashing effect in the deck is mandatory except for EX2 Impmon. If you're not careful, you'll end up burning through your whole deck without ever building a winning board. If the opponent recognizes this, they can just stall a bit and let you take care of yourself. The second weakness is a combination of things that all feed into each other. Most of the trashing effects in the deck are when digivolving effects. This means that you have to build your stack on the board if you want those effects to activate. Of course, building on the board is always risky because you open yourself up to removal. On top of this, the deck doesn't have enough draw power to reliably build a second stack if your first one dies. Rival's Barrage can help with this, but at only 2 copies, it's not a guarantee. Lastly, and this is kind of a given for starter decks, but consistency is an issue. With all of the best cards at just 2 copies, it's common to not see what you need until it's too late. There are also a lot of out-of-archetype pieces that will cause searches to miss or be unable to activate inherited effects. We've reached the second half of the video, so it's time to talk about combos and rules. First, a very important rule. In Digimon, there are 2 steps to activating an effect: triggering and activation. Triggering is when the conditions to activate the effect are met. Activation is the part where you actually do the effect. For example, a Digimon has the effect, when attacking, draw 1. The trigger is attacking with that Digimon, and the activation is drawing the card. Easy so far. But what happens when multiple effects are triggered at the same time? When this happens, all triggered effects go into a state called pending activation. From there, the player activates the effects one by one in the order of their choice. This rule will come into play in many examples, so just sit tight and by the end you should have a pretty good understanding of how it works. Moving on to the combo, here's what you need to set it up. In the battle area, you need Iron Mako and a level 5 Digimon, preferably a full stack, but it's not required. In your hand, you need Beelzemon, Blast Mode, and a card that gains you memory when trashed from the deck. If you're missing anything from your hand, now is the time to use the delay effect of Rival's Barrage to grab it from the trash. Finally, you need at least 16 cards in your trash. Keep in mind that this setup is for the ideal version of the combo. You won't have all the pieces in every game, and will need to make tweaks depending on how much memory you have available. This is also a simplified example, if you can believe it, so I'll be leaving things like inherited effects out since they don't matter to the core combo. I'm going to assume the worst case scenario of starting your turn with 1 memory. Don't worry, it's all we need. Okay, let's go through this together. First, we'll Digivolve Beelzemon on top of our level 5 Digimon for 4 memory. Beelzemon's when Digivolving effect and Iron Mako trigger at the same time. Remember what I just said. Effects that trigger at the same time become pending activations and can be activated in any order we want. We'll want to activate Iron Mako first, so suspend it and place the card that gains a memory when trashed on top of the deck and gain a memory from Iron Mako. Beelzemon's effect is still pending, so it activates next to trash the top 4 cards of the deck. We're guaranteed to gain at least 1 memory from this because of the card we just put there. Our queue of pending effects has been cleared out, but since we just trashed a card from the deck, Beelzemon's other 2 abilities trigger and become pending. This time the order doesn't matter, so let's do them in the order on the card. First we gain 2 memory because there are now 20 cards in our trash, and then Beelzemon gets security +1 for the turn. We're now back at 1 memory and our turn continues. Swing with Beelzemon for 2 checks. Assuming it survives, Digivolve into Blast Mode for 4 memory. Blast Mode's when Digivolving effect activates, unsuspending it and gaining us 3 memory, putting us back at 0 and continuing our turn once again. Finally, attack with Blast Mode for 2 more checks since it keeps the security +1 it gained as Beelzemon. The combo is finally done and we can pass turn however we want. 4 checks for 1 memory isn't bad, huh? You've most likely just stripped your opponent's security bare and are in a position to win next turn if they can't remove Blast Mode. You can also do the combo by using starter deck Impmon to warp Digivolve into Beelzemon. The setup is mostly the same. You still need Iron Mako on the board with Blast Mode and a memory gain card in your hand. The difference is that this time you need 20 cards in the trash, Beelzemon among them. Starter deck Impmon will be taking the place of the level 5 Digimon. To begin, attack with Impmon to trigger its when attacking ability, allowing it to warp Digivolve into Beelzemon from the trash. From there, we'll follow the same steps as the previous example, starting with activating Iron Mako and stopping when Beelzemon gains security +1. At this point, the procedure will diverge slightly. Normally we would attack with Beelzemon, but we can't because Beelzemon already attacked as Impmon. So what happens? Well, we just do the checks as if we had attacked, because we did, but we had to wait for all the effects to play out first. Let me explain. In Digimon, an attack has 2 stages, similar to triggering and activating an effect. Attack declaration is when the player announces that they will attack their opponent or one of their Digimon and suspends the attacking Digimon. What I'll call attack conclusion is when the attack actually happens, the point at which security checks are performed or 2 Digimon battle. The important thing to know is that when an attack is declared, all effects triggered as a result of that attack must resolve before it concludes. In our case, we declared an attack with Impmon, which triggered a chain of effects. The attack conclusion gets put on hold while everything activates. At the end of that chain, our Impmon is now Beelzemon with security +1, so we get to do 2 checks at 12,000 DP, because the game only cares about the stats of your Digimon when the attack concludes, not when it's declared. From this point on, the combo plays out the same way as before, so finish up by Digivolving into Blast Mode and swinging again. Now that you know how to win the game, let's clear up all the tricky rules, which, as you probably guessed, have to do with the trash. If you haven't already added the EX2 Impmon reprints into your deck, now's the time to do it because it's featured heavily in this section and makes the deck a lot scarier. Like before, I'll be leaving out things that aren't relevant for brevity. I also won't be mentioning when effects are triggered or become pending. I think I made my point in the combo section. The first rule is that option cards activate before going to the trash. This applies both to options played from the hand and options checked in security. For example, you have 19 cards in your trash and you use Deathslinger from your hand. Since Deathslinger activates before going to the trash, it sees that you have 19 cards and can only delete a level 5 or lower Digimon. The same happens if your opponent checks a Deathslinger in your security. To more directly address the confusion I see some players having, Deathslinger does not count itself as the 20th card because it activates before it goes to the trash, not from the trash. The second rule is that when you trash cards from your deck, they all get trashed at the same time, not one by one. For these examples, assume that you just digivolved into Beelzemon and are about to activate his when digivolving effect to trash 4 cards. Example 1. We already covered this in the combo, but I want to reiterate it here. You have 18 cards in your trash. You trash 4 cards all at the same time, bringing the total to 22. Since you trashed a card, Beelzemon's memory gain effect activates, netting you 2 memory. Example 2. You have 15 cards in trash. You trash 4 and hit EX2 Impmon. Impmon's effect to trash 3 more cards triggers, but so does Beelzemon's memory gain effect. That means you get to choose the activation order. Right now you only have 19 cards in your trash, so activate Impmon first to trash 3 more. Now you're at 22 and Beelzemon activates to gain 2 memory. Third rule, when effects activate, they must be fully resolved before moving on to the next effect. Here's the example. You digivolve into Skull Satamon. Its when digivolving effect says to trash 2 cards from your deck, then return 1 Demon Lord from your trash to your hand. Even though this effect has 2 steps, it's still one effect and must be done in its entirety before proceeding. Let's say the 2 cards we trash are EX2 Impmon and a Nothing card. Though Impmon was just trashed, it can't trigger yet because Skull Satamon's effect is still going. After returning a Demon Lord from your trash to your hand, Impmon is free to trigger and activate. The final rule I'll be covering is what to do when an effect is triggered while there are already pending activations waiting to happen. Digimon uses a last in, first out system, meaning that the most recent effects must be activated before any older effects can resume. Let's go right into the example to make sense of this. 23 cards in trash, your opponent has a level 6 on the board. Digivolve into Beelzemon to trash 4. You hit an EX2 Impmon, so both Impmon and Beelzemon trigger. You decide to activate Impmon first, and you hit Blast Mode and Rivals Barrage. What now? Blast Mode and Rivals Barrage trigger at the same time, as we know, but what about Beelzemon's effect? Well, it's put on hold for the moment. Since Blast Mode and Rivals Barrage are the most recent effects to trigger, they have to be resolved first. At this moment, you have 30 cards in your trash, exactly enough to delete your opponent's level 6 with Blast Mode. Rivals Barrage comes out of the trash when using its effect, which will leave you at 29. We can't have that, so activate Blast Mode first to delete the opponent's level 6. Then you have to decide whether or not you want to activate Rivals Barrage, since it's optional. If you do, you'll gain just 2 memory from Beelzemon, but have the ability to retrieve something from trash next turn. If you don't, you'll gain 3 memory from Beelzemon, but you'll lose the ability to grab a card in the future. It's up to you to decide which is more important. That was a lot, so thanks for sticking with me. Hopefully now you have a better understanding of both the deck and the rules in general. Obviously I didn't cover every possible scenario, so if you still have questions, I highly recommend asking in the Digimon TCG 2020 Discord, which will be linked below. So to wrap up, what's the verdict? I really like this product and hope we see more like it in the future. It's worth the extra money in my opinion and is easy to recommend to both new and existing players. The last thing I want to do is throw up a deck list made from 2 copies of the Beelzemon starter. I basically just doubled up on all the cards that were at 2 copies, and took out as many out-of-archetype cards as possible. If you decide to buy a second copy of this deck, you'll notice a big boost in both power and consistency. Well, that's all I have for you. As always, I hope you learned something, and thanks for watching. Bye!